So, very special episode today, outside of either of the seasons, so between seasons. And I want to welcome back onto the show Manda Scott and Rupert Read.
It's a
friends
delight.
of the podcast and extraordinary pioneers, thinkers, and being in this world. And there's a very special reason why we're gathering here today. You reached out to me with your extraordinary book, Transformative Adaptation, which is beautiful. And we're going to be talking about that today and some of the themes. But first, I'd like to open with a question to both of you, which you'll both be familiar with, which is, what do you sense or imagine is happening in the global human psyche as we record this towards the beginning of August 2025?
Rupert, go on, you go first.
Right, the easy ones first, huh?
All right.
So, look, I think there's a lot happening, which is one reason why it's not an easy question to answer. But I'll try to pick out a few themes that I've been noticing. One is that I think that there's a lot of waking up to the fact that there's a lot of waking up going on. This is this crucial point about breaking through what's called pluralistic ignorance, right? The idea that a lot of people don't realize that a lot of people realize what they realize. And that when they get to realize that other people are realizing it too, this is an absolutely vital thing. It's absolutely central to our theory of change at the Climate Majority Project. And we think that some of this is happening kind of right now. For example, quite a lot of people are waking up to the fact that quite a lot of other people are aware that we are now severely exposed to collapse risk. Quite a lot of people are waking up to the fact that quite a lot of other people are sort of fed up pretty much to the back teeth with the system and are looking for alternatives. And that might be, engaging in some local rewilding or food growing scheme, or it might be starting some kind of different business ventures, different things it could be. But it is a moment, I think, at which a lot of people are realizing, oh my God, this isn't just kind of me feeling weird or disconnected or something. Lots of other people feel that too. And of course, the beauty of it is that when lots of people feel even something like disconnection and realize that lots of other people feel it, then they're instantly less disconnected. So it's a moment of enormous opportunity in that sense. I would say also that there's always something kind of tragic or at least difficult about such moments of realization, because the hope that one often nurtures is that the reason why one thinks, oh God, I think we're in real trouble here, but it seems like it's just me who's thinking this. When one thinks that, the hope that one nurtures is that one's wrong, right?
Yeah.
And when one realizes lots of other people are feeling the same way, then you kind of have to give up on the hope that you're wrong. And you realize that you're part of something much bigger, which is both a terrible realization and a wonderful realization. Mm-hmm. So, I guess that's my kind of key observation, that I'm seeing quite a lot of that happening at the moment. For example, on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is an interesting platform, but there's lots of, super people on it. It's less polarized than other social media platforms. It allows more long form discussion. And I'm seeing quite a lot of that kind of thinking on LinkedIn, among other places.
Interesting. And Manda, how about you? How do you begin to answer that question?
Yeah, I would broadly agree with Rupert. I think, but we're also heading to a point where the polarizations are becoming more extreme, but also more obvious. I think the masks have come off, business as usual. And it's really hard to pretend that capitalism is benign anymore. The fact the death cult is obviously a death cult in ways that even 6 months ago it wasn't. The Trump administration has stripped away a lot of the pretense that people were able to follow. Having said that, I was talking the call before this with someone who's a sustainability officer at a $1 trillion network. And apparently within that network, the new magical thinking is that AI will fix everything and is a way to super profits. And that's all that matters. They're still in first quarter thinking and how do we maximize profits? And AI is going to get us out of this. So having said which, individuals know that this is not the case. And we're exactly back to what Rupert was saying was there's a collective narrative that says one thing and an individual narrative that says something different. And at the point when the individuals realize that there are many thousands of individuals who share the narrative that is absolutely in contradistinction to the collective narrative, that's when the narrative shifts.
Yeah.
And it feels to me as if there's a pebble hovering right at the top of the cliff that could kick the avalanche into action of a tipping point of narrative shift. And that what we're doing, the three of us in our different ways, is nudging that pebble.
Yeah. It's very interesting when you talk about, just briefly, when you mentioned the AI thing, it's my business to talk about how AI and business and human behavior and values and resilience, I guess, intersect. And one of the things I noticed in every single conference I've been to for the last year is that it's always the talk about the existential, beautiful questions that people come up to me afterwards and want to have a chat about. It's about what do you most profoundly love? How do you touch the greatest joy? Where does the meaning come from in your life? And how can we bring AI and technology in service to that, as opposed to kind of letting the tail wag the dog? And I think so many people in these rooms where they're being force-fed this narrative of AI as the newest tool, as a part of this capitalist extraction machine, being this panacea, the savior. And we're all like, hell if it is. Like, this is the most extraordinary extraction racket, if you like, the way it's currently being used. And it has the potential, like so many technologies, if wielded with restraint, thoughtfulness, wisdom, to be able to have tremendous positive impacts in the world. But of course, that gets lost in the noise. There's all this counterattack. And then what benefits we could potentially gain from thoughtful, restrained use is completely annihilated by the avalanche of counter movement against all the extraordinary harms. Yeah, go on.
Well, Nathalie, I love what you just said, and I'm impressed by the use of the word existential that you made there. It brings to mind a related point that I've argued for some time, that we are facing an unprecedented raft of what are called existential threats, or sometimes shortened to X risks. And it's very clear that the existential threat around AI has drastically grown in the last couple of years, for example. That's arguably the biggest single change in the world in the past couple of years. And when people are trying to figure out how to deal with those existential threats, what they often do, understandably, is they reach for, as Manda said, magical thinking, or they reach, if they go one step beyond that, they reach for a sort of hyper-rational thinking, which is still typically actually underneath it all a kind of magical thinking. Part of what we actually need to reach for is exactly what you said, i.e. recalibrating to a sense of what actually matters in life and finding meaning in the crisis. You know, I've argued at some length in my books that we're going to find, and we already are starting to find, great meaning in this horrendous crisis. And that means that in response to these existential threats, possibly the most important thing that we can do is reach for a better sense of our life as what Martin Heidegger called an existence. This is the sense of the word existential, which is used by the existentialist philosophers famously, right? It's the idea of one has to have a project, one has to have a sense of what is one's being and what is one's coming. One has to have, along with others, a sense of purpose. Otherwise, there is literally no point. So it seems to me that this is an encouraging thought and another encouraging aspect of our difficult moment. And it's certainly something, a sense which is present in our book on transformative adaptation, that in the midst of this horrendous set of challenges, we have an opportunity to make a better life. And if we don't try to make that better life and to really realize it, then those horrendous threats will overcome us. So the whole thing is, in that sense, kind of rather beautifully joined up.
So in preparing for this interview, I read around the subject, as one does, and read your posts. And I wrote a passage drawing from various different places to tee up a question. To that point, actually, Rupert, about imagination and the idea of being able to envision something that is rooted in and aligned with a deeper sense of purpose and values, aligned with the flourishing of the web of life, to use, Manda, many of your beautiful words. And so I was recently interviewing Rob Hopkins about his new book, How to Fall in Love with the Future. Yeah, and it was just wonderful. And in our conversation, he talked about the disimagination machine, which I thought was a fabulous term. And so I dug into this and found that it came from Henry Giroux's 2014 book called The Violence of Organized Forgetting, Thinking Beyond America's Disimagination Machine. And he was talking about in the book, and this is lifted, so if you want to reference it or read into it, you can, talking about being distracted, miseducated, and deterred by, he talks about elite forces, from acting as the public, as citizens, in our own interests and presumably in the interests of life. And that even folks who are quote unquote progressive are stuck in a discourse of foreclosure and disaster, like giving up in advance, obeying in advance, capitulating in advance, to use my words, I would guess. And he's talking about getting citizens to create counter-narratives. And I wondered if I can just read this quote from him and then throw back to you to open what your reflections might be in the light of your book. So I'm quoting directly from Giroux here. He says, "It's not enough for people of conscience only to expose the falseness of the stories we are told. Educators, artists, intellectuals, workers, young people, and other concerned citizens need to create alternative narratives about what the promise of democracy might be for our communities, and I would say our more than human communities, and ourselves. This demands a break from established political parties, the creation of alternative public spheres in which to produce democratic narratives and vision, and notion of politics that is educative, one that takes seriously how people interpret and mediate the world, how they see themselves in relation to others, and what it might mean to imagine otherwise in order to act otherwise." So I thought that was beautifully coherent with the clarion call of your book, Transformative Adaptation, where you say that creating a flourishing future, even in the jaws of adversity, requires us first to imagine it together. So I want to start by maybe starting there and asking you, what moved you to collaborate with your other co-authors, with Morgan Phillips and other contributors on this book right now? I know it's been out for a little while, but like there's something about the preciousness of this moment.
Yeah. So I'll start on that and then I'll hand to Manda. There's so much richness in what you just said, Nathalie. A beautiful quotation. I was just with Rob Hopkins the other day at the Green Gathering, where Manda also was talking about these things, talking about our deep agreements on them, also exploring some of our disagreements, which maybe we'll come to later in this podcast. But really, the origins of the Transformative Adaptation book is in the sense that we are now in the age of climate and ecological consequences. It is too late to fantasize we can prevent crisis, that we can stop disasters before they happen, etc. Many of them are now here. Worse are going to come. So we are in, therefore, the age of adaptation. So how do we transform that age into something which is actually worthwhile and can get us through what is coming? And that is connected with the idea of transformative adaptation, which is to be a form of adaptation which is not just defensive and reactive, but which is imaginative, which is looking to decarbonize in relation to climate, to decarbonize at the same time as we adapt, which is looking to work with nature rather than against nature, which is looking, most crucially of all perhaps, to facilitate our flourishing in the very jaws of adversity. So Morgan and I got together and spoke with others in the sort of loose community of people who had formed around the idea of transformative adaptation. We thought, okay, we're going to do a little book on this. We're going to edit a book. I'm going to try to bring together a bunch of the voices who are thinking and acting best on this. So one thing that's important about the book is that it contains essays from a number of practitioners in community climate action, in climate hubs, and so on and so forth. It also very heavily references the amazing transformative adaptation work, which has been going on for some time, of course, in parts of the global south. Because, of course, the global south the climate front lines have been dealing with these kinds of questions for longer than many of us have. So this is partly about learning from the global south, learning from Nepal, learning from Rojava, etc. And where Manda came in is that, and she's written by far the longest chapter in the book, is that she is, of course, a great example of someone who both at the level of nonfiction and at the level of fiction has tried to imagine in some detail what this looks like. So Manda, perhaps at this point, over to you to take up the baton.
Yes, thank you. And I was very honoured to be invited to share with this book, because I haven't been a non-fiction writer for very long. And yet, Rupert's right. This is what Joanna Macy called the Great Turning. And when she first coined that phrase, I think a lot of us who read it thought we would be lucky to be alive to see it. And now we're in it.
Yeah.
I was listening to another podcast not very long ago with someone who, her kids had left home. She'd gone back to university, like middle age, and she'd done a degree and then a master's. And in the first term of the first semester, of the first year of her degree, she'd been presented with some climate statistics and some graphs, and they had best case, medium case, worst case. And by the time she'd finished her master's, all of the parameters had exceeded the worst case that they were given at the beginning of her degree. And partly this is because we lack imagination. People coalesce around what they want to believe is going to be true, rather than anything that is actually going to be true. And I think what's happening now is that the possibility of doing that is becoming less. People are still moving from denial to despair with no step in the middle. But what then I think we can offer is the potential for stepping into this moment with heart and courage and vision. Because if we can imagine a different future, then we can bring it into being. Yeah. That's what Rob is saying. That's what everyone is saying, is this concept of future memories as a neurocognitive reality that our brains don't distinguish between the things we imagine have happened or could happen and the things that have actually happened. So if we can create fiction and books that feel real, then they are as real to our physiology as anything else. And we still exist in a world where it is easier to imagine the total extinction of all complex life for the sixth time, so it's not this hasn't happened before, than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. And that needs not to be the case. And so I think what this book and other work around it, and the people who are actually working on the ground are doing, is softening the edges of that. Because I don't know anyone who thinks the current system is useful or working for them. Where we disagree is what's possible. And creating the narrative of possibility feels to me, this is the work of this moment. This is what all of us are doing and need to do, is open doors to things that don't seem obvious when the disimagination machine is at full bore. But I think what this moment is giving us is openings of people who are realizing that the disimagination machine has caught them and they want to flip out of it, but they don't yet see where to go. And so, absolutely, this book is, and everything that we're doing is about opening the doors to alternative possibilities that feel real. And I think that's really important, is we've got to offer people that sense, the thrutopic sense that Rupert and I talk about, of having a sense of steps that we can take towards a future that we can't see because it's emergent. Yeah. And the point about emergence is that it's not predictable from the existing system. If you can predict it, it's not an emergent new system. But we can take steps that will lead us to the edge that we would like to leap from, as opposed to the one that's being offered at the moment.
So there are multiple levels and places that I then want to go from what you've both just touched upon. But I think where I'd like to go first is you're talking about imagination. And you mentioned the possibility of unhooking ourselves or falling out of enchantment with this disimagination machine to see what else might be possible, to sense it, to feel it. And in the book, towards the end, actually, Manda, you quote the brilliant Ursula Le Guin, who in her 2014 speech at the National Book Awards says, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable, but then so did the divine right of kings. Any human power," title of your book, "any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Yeah. Resistance and change often begin in art, very often in our art, your art, the art of words." And so if there were, and there is, and there are multiple different kinds of rallying cries or calls that you could issue to artists everywhere on this earth right now, every stripe of artist, people who live creative lives in whatever large or small way that might be, what would it be? Like, what would be your call? and drawing upon the book or from anywhere else you'd like to draw from.
Rupert,
you start, Manda, and then I'll go.
Go on, Manda. Yeah.
Well, build Thrutopic futures. I think this is, and for me, every single human being is creative. Everything that we do arises from the stories we tell ourselves and each other about ourselves and each other and our place in the more than human world. Everything. So if you're an engineer or an architect or working in a call center, you're still being creative. So I think two things. One is offer yourself in service to life, whatever that means to you. And second, imagine the future that you would actually run towards. Something that makes your heart sing, something that you would yearn for, and then work out the paths to get there. I think that we need to establish shared common values. I had a fascinating conversation with the slightly distracted side of our family that are, let's say, pro-Trump. Yeah. They really think he's a very wonderful human being doing very good things. And I could quite easily get super triggered about that. But I thought, pay attention to all the podcasts. And we had a conversation that was instead, what do you, MAGA people, want to happen? And they said, we just want everyone to be nicer to everybody else.
Wow.
And yes, half my brain explodes along the, what? Oh, but I didn't go there. We talked about what would that mean for you? And I think my three that I think 3 is a good number. 3 is very magical. Integrity, compassion, and generosity of spirit. If we could agree on those, I think that would help to shape the future. I think we need to do the inner work. We have to. Dick Schwartz says that almost all of us, almost all of the time, are walking around in a state of continual internal civil war.
Yeah.
And I don't know anyone who isn't. But we can call a truce and we can build peace. We're possibly the first generation for many thousands of years in our culture. We have the tools to do this. We have the cultural capacity to do the inner work and then to build the relationships with each other and then to build the relationships with the more than human world. And we have to do this. If we're alive today, we have to do this. It doesn't matter what age we are. Do the individual, collective, and ancestral healing that it takes to become adult, to become elders. We were talking earlier about AI. I'm tangentially involved in a project about could AI become a useful eldering tool. It's a whole separate conversation. But we need to grow up. We need to stop just reacting from our triggers. And I think the future that we want to step into is a future of emotionally literate individuals engaging in good faith and compassion for ourselves and each other and the rest of the human world. Consider what that feels like. And when you can feel it in your bones, do every single thing that you can to get there and tell everybody else what it looks like and what it feels like so that they too bring the amazing creativity of humanity to bear on heading in that direction instead of driving us over the cliff that profit and extraction is creating for us. That would be my... Please do that. Rupert, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks,
you,
Manda. Yeah, beautiful. And what I'd like to add to that starts from your very helpful invocation of Ursula Le Guin, who is an important figure for us hereabouts in more ways than one. It was from my reading of Ursula Le Guin's work that I first got the idea of Thrutopia, especially from reading around her incredible work of fictionalized political theory, The Dispossessed, which, if anyone hasn't read it, I do strongly recommend it. It's not the best written book ever, but the concepts and the progress of it are just so important. It's not even Ursula Le Guin's best written book, but I think it may be her most important book. And it's from The Dispossessed that I really got this idea of we need to create a kind of successor to the old concept of utopia, which is kind of no longer valid, which emphasizes much more how we're going to actually work in the present and be present while we're doing it, to connect again with Manda's invocation of inner work, to create the kind of future that we want and recognize that that is always in process and always in transformation. So to come to the concept of transformative adaptation again, you could think of transformative adaptation, which is more or less the same thing as what in the Climate Majority Project we call strategic adaptation, as arguably the main thing that we need collectively to do in the world today. We need to find a way of orienting to the crisis that we're in that enables us to cope with it and flourish through it and stop it from getting worse all at the same time, and to find meaning in it. Thrutopianism is about the imaginative dimension of transformative adaptation, I would say. But as Manda said, the thing about imagination is when we think of imagination, we often think of artists and writers and filmmakers and so forth. And that's right. But actually, everybody is relevant to imagination.
Yeah.
So, obviously architects are relevant. Obviously politicians and civil servants are relevant. Obviously farmers are relevant. But actually everybody's relevant, not least in their capacity as a citizen, right? So in that sense, we need to make sure that on the one hand, we understand that artists and writers have a special role here. But on the other hand, this is not just about them, and we can't just outsource it to them. We all actually have to step up into what we need, the Thrutopian imagination, the idea of how we think together about how we get through this in the best possible way, which can still be really good. But on just a word then on the special role of artists. So what I've been banging on about for the last decade in various ways is that artists do have a special role. And so far, a lot of them haven't really stepped up into that role. They haven't done what Manda said. They haven't made an effort to imagine thrutopically. This applies, I would say, especially in certain domains. It applies especially in TV, and in relation to games and in relation to music. With TV is particularly crucial because it's still an absolute mass medium. It doesn't have the completely dominant position it had 10 years ago, but it still dictates quite a lot of the nation's conversation and kind of cultural intake, etc., in this country and in most other countries. So writers have been stepping into the Thrutopian space, poets now as well, dramatists, increasingly filmmakers are starting to do it. But there's so much more to be done. And so I would just urge any creatives who are listening to this, and that of course doesn't just mean artists, but it does mean artists and writers in particular. I would urge any creatives who are listening to this, if you have any doubts about what to do with the rest of your life, consider trying to take seriously stepping into this space in the way that Manda has done, in the way that Steve Waters has done as a playwright, that I think Steve Markley has done as a novelist. I'm thinking of a work like The End We Start From, which I've written about as being a wonderful example of the Thrutopian imagination. There are more and more all the time, and that's what we need, more and more, and we need really high quality ones, and we need them to reach a really mass audience.
So question there then, because I have definitely encountered among many of my friends are artists and musicians, and I've definitely encountered among many people of different stripes of creative practice this deep, deep longing to make a change in the world, and this hunger for a place and a container within which to meet, to be together, to breathe together, to grieve together, to sing, to move. I recently, back in June, went to Plum Village, the Zen Buddhist retreat centre in southern France for artists. And it was one of these such spaces. I had no idea how Thich Nhat Hanh's kind of practice and philosophy was so earth related. They consider earth as one of the bodhisattvas, the holy beings, the ascended.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was just phenomenal. Having been raised Catholic, it was like, hang on, where has this been hiding all my life? They revere the earth. I'm like, this is just wild. And much, much older than the faith I was raised in, which, is not to diminish it in any way. But I wonder if there are examples perhaps that you've encountered, or maybe it's to be created, of places where people can gather who are interested, who are sparked by this invitation that you've both generously extended to meet and to experience what it might be like to put our skills and capacities and desires in service to Thrutopian imagining and sense making and creation. Because I think often it's kind of the urge is there and we just don't know what to do with it, or it can feel insurmountable. Or for instance, for me, it's like, well, I have a role as a speaker on a stage and I'm thinking, okay, well, I'd like to subvert that and do other things, but then I also want to be able to have the freedom. So that there's so many different factors to take into consideration. So Are there places that do this? If they are, what are they, so we can direct people? And if not, let's make it happen. Let's do one. The Thrutopic gathering.
Can I make a start? Because I do have a few very much in mind, and I'm sure Manda does too. But I would also say that there need to be far more, and they need to be more resourced and so forth. But in terms of what there is, I would say the Green Gathering offers a bit of this kind of potentiality. It is a very special festival, and there's a number of festivals one could mention, but I think the Green Gathering really stands out in this regard. I would definitely say Plum Village. That was very much the experience I had when I was on retreat in Plum Village with Thich Nhat Hanh. I would say the Raft. The Raft is a new venture being incubated by the Client Majority Project. It's primarily virtual at the moment, although it does have real gatherings. We're going to have a gathering in September 2025 on the theme of, wait for it, Thrutopia. So that clearly is trying to step up in that regard. There are various other places I could mention. There should be a lot more, but those three somewhat stand out for me. What would you say, Manda? Oh, I've got one more, which is, of course, Manda's course. Manda's course on Thrutopia and writing and so forth. Over to you, Manda.
Yeah, give me a second. Edit this bit out because I'm just checking
the
title.
32:10.
It's not working. No.
This is really helpful because people want resources. Like I want resources, and if we can point people, then
can I give you the link to the Thrutopia residency? When will this air, Nathalie?
I have yet to tell Caro that this is happening because I've been quite full on with other things.
Been off.
I've been away. Well, I've been in my art, but I'm hoping very soon. So I'm going to send her an email, and then as soon as she can turn it around, I'll upload it the next Sunday.
Yeah, brilliant.
So I'm hoping in the next 2 weeks.
If you can get this out in the next few weeks, then this link I'm about to give you is good to go.
Great. Yeah, share it with me in the chat.
Yeah.
Let me find, where's the chat?
Go ahead, Manda.
Okay. Yes. Let me just put this in the chat for you.
Let me find it. Here we go. Okay, hold on.
Why can I not get to the chat? Okay, I can't get to the chat at the moment. Don't worry about it. I'll sort it out and send you.
You have to click on live stream chat.
Yeah, I've got it. I can see it, but it won't let me post. But I'm not going to risk upsetting the gods of the tech.
don't upset the tech. You can always send it to me later. But,
I'll give myself a 3-second run-in so Cara's got something to go with.
Okay.
Well, thank you for the plug on the Thrutopian masterclass. That is still there. We ran it 3 years ago. So some of the concepts I think are a bit out of date, but then I realized that I exist in a world where this is what I'm doing all of the time. And for some people, they're still really new. There's so much that's really exciting at the moment. There's an Edge Cities project. And this is based on the ideas of Audrey Tang, where what happens if we just actually create the future we want and let it run for a month at a time. So the California one is happening sometime this month in August. And they're happening all around the world. There was one, I don't remember exactly where the other ones were, but there was some in the Global South, some in Asia. There hasn't yet been one in Britain. But I'm talking to some people who run a big festival to see what happens if that festival, the people who go there, 50,000 people under the age of 35, what would it be like to create an edge city? Because they're doing some really interesting, radical stuff of exploring alternative voting capacities and alternative ways of structuring politics. Because if you've lived it, then you know that it works.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people in the political sphere doing this. Our house are going around all of the 4 nations of the UK, so Scotland, England, Ireland, Wales, for listeners outside of the UK, and rebuilding the charter movement. So what happens? What would a charter for Scotland, England, Ireland and Wales look like? And then in 2026, they're going to they're holding people's assemblies, come together, let's build a charter for your area, and then we'll bring those together and create a charter for your nation. And then a charter of charters of all 4 nations to see, do we want a UK-wide charter or do we want one for each country? And so I think we're at that interface where creative work and politics come together, where creative work and agriculture come together. There are permaculture festivals all around the country, and those are often people are there who write as well as working the land. There are publishing venues. I think one of the things that we're discovering, I've just got quite an interesting grant together to look at how do we impact the leverage points? Because a friend of mine said we can write as many Thrutopian scripts for TV as you want, but no one will commission them. So therefore nobody will see them. Why not? And that's just partly we're caught in the chicken and egg of capitalism, that they have commissioning structures that they have to fit inside, and those commissioning structures depend on making the right amount of money for the people who are funding. And we need to break that somehow, or we need to persuade the people who have the money that there are other priorities. At the moment, what we're seeing is the best we can do is move the kind of Overton window of commissioning, open it as wide as we can, so that the people who want to can shift to an edge that is more flexible than it used to be. But I think the more really good scripts they get, if someone were to write a script for, I don't know, let's just say James Bond, that was still an amazing James Bond 007, does all the stuff with the fancy cars and the fancy women, but was stating openly that the existing system is falling apart, and what we, the good guys, are trying to do is not maintain capitalism, which is what James Bond does currently, but move to a new system. If that were a good enough script, it would get made. And I think that kind of thing, if you write for EastEnders, it used to be the case that I had a friend who wrote for Asoap, not that one, in the UK, and would occasionally write people taking out the recycling, and it would be written out by the editors every single episode because, and I quote directly, our funding depends on people wanting to replace the granite worktops in their kitchen every year, and if you suggest that that's not sustainable, they won't do it and we won't get the funding. Wow. That's not happening anymore as much, or at least I'm told. I don't watch TV, so I can't tell you. But as I understand it, that restriction is being softened, but it needs to go. We need each of the soaps to yes, you can have your astonishing, as far as I'm concerned, utterly emotionally illiterate drama going on, but it is a very, very long time since I watched anything like that, and I didn't watch for more than 5 minutes. But how do we create emotional literacy as everybody's default? How do we create doing the inner healing as everybody's default in every crime novel, in every romance novel, in every fantasy fiction? How do we create that as the default from which people arise? And I would say fantasy fiction is the area where that is being most explored. There's some astonishingly emotionally literate stuff being written now in fantasy. So it's there as a leading edge. And I know that Pathos Labs, PopShift, ran something called Futures Base Camp in May, where they invited a lot of really big hitting names. So they had Gene Roddenberry's son.
No way!
So, the person who owns the franchise for Star Trek.
I love Star Trek.
Amongst other things, was there. And futurists, and the scriptwriters, and the commissioners, and the showrunners to 3 days in Joshua Tree. So we're going to take your phones away. You're going to be in this amazingly beautiful place in the middle of the desert, and you're just going to talk about what the future could look like and how, in your little subgenre, you could make it happen.
Yeah. So one of the things that touches on, that desire for belonging and to connect to something, and kind of the way in which that can be leveraged to sow division and create more suffering. I think that's particularly possible when we're unaware of what's going on and we're unable to sit with discomfort and look inside and have a sense of how we respond to whatever feelings might be arising, and have some quality of self-understanding and knowledge and the rest of it. And so I want to ask, just momentarily really, because you mentioned this at the top of our conversation, what are some of the ways in which we might begin to welcome the parts of ourselves that we've alienated, the shadows, the parts that have been exiled, so we can more consciously and compassionately orient ourselves towards healing from a place of compassion and love, as opposed to from this place of fear, which is, it's so easy to do, to get caught. And the small naggy fears are almost the worst. It's like...
Yes, you're the person who just came back from Plum Village. I think you could probably talk to that. Why don't you tell us what you think, and then we can add in bits.
Oh, okay. So, well, funnily enough, I was thinking about this today. I've had a few days to myself because my partner Freddie's back in Costa Rica with his family, and I decided to take this month for my creative work and my practice. And I've been doing this thing that I actually got in a journey, just a heartbeat meditation, sitting with a drumming a slow heartbeat on it, and just breathing. And I realized yesterday that all I wanted to do was eat croissants and chocolate and drink wine and like just hoard. And I noticed this in my body first, and this sense of real agitation and discomfort and wanting to sort of, I was like, okay, hold on, what if I don't go for the ice cream, which is hard for me. And I did the meditation, and it was only towards the end that I started really relaxing. And I realized underneath that was just this sense of, it was just this thought of, oh, fuck. When I think about the world, when I think about the pain that exists, when I think about the suffering, when I use my faculties and my capacities to try and put some kind of embrace around or try and grasp in some form or other the immensity of what's happening, and just not being equipped to be able to do that as a solitary little node. Yeah. And so then the back to that thing about compassion and consciousness was just, it's okay to rest in this heartbeat and not do anything other than just breathe and feel the feeling and let the drum carry me, or let the music of my loved ones carry me. And actually that's the thing that I've found I'm reaching for the most. And it's not a grasping, which has a different quality to it, but it's this pulling towards, let me rest in the voices of others, the music of others, the sound of the drum, or the painting, whatever it is. And so I think there's something there about resting in that which we can sense and feel, and to give ourselves permission to let go. Because my tendency is to want to understand as much as I can in that kind of vigilant way, and then to be able to go, oh, that's what I'm doing. How about if I don't for a little while and try and come back to that? I don't know if that's even remotely helpful, but that's a reflection.
Of course it is. Yes.
Yeah.
Rupert, do you want to say something? And then
the dimension I'd like to add is in terms of integration of our different and, of course, constantly changing emotional responses. Because this has been very important and continues to be in my work. This is something which I learned initially from my great late teacher, Joanna Macy, and I focus it, as often she did, especially on the so-called negative emotions, which I think is actually an unhelpful term. More accurately, the aversive emotions which, when you feel them, typically don't feel good. So shame and guilt, fear, anxiety, grief, anger, and at the end of it all, often despair. And when I teach my courses on spiritual adaptation, which is, a dimension of, or interconnected with, transformative adaptation, I would say, one of the things I love to do is go sort of right there to despair and say to people, you've been taught that you mustn't despair, that despair is the worst thing, that despair is inconsolable, that despair will sink you and finish you. Well, what if that's all wrong? What if what you actually need to do is accept and make friends with your despair? What happens if you take the risk of doing that? Because, of course, it is a risk, right? Despair does not feel good, right? But the case I've made in relation to this is that what's actually happening in our world today is that a lot of people, and I would cite here my friends, the stubborn optimists in relation to climate, a lot of people are spending an awful lot of emotional energy fending off their despair. So I say, what if you stop fending off and you actually allow it to move through you? Because, of course, that is what happens. This is the astonishing thing one discovers whenever one works with and allows the aversive emotions. They don't stay around forever. The fear is, if I allow myself to really go into this despair, I'll never come out of it. But actually what happens virtually always is you come out of it far quicker than you expected, and actually far quicker than you would if you just tried constantly, as many people do, to keep it at bay. This is what Søren Kierkegaard, the great Danish theologian philosopher, observed in the 19th century, that true despair will not acknowledge that it is present, right? As soon as you acknowledge that you're feeling despair, you're no longer completely stuck in it. And that's the start of a journey through it. And when you start to journey through it, what you also find is you can get enormous energy from doing this despair work. So this is what a lot of what I do with my students. And so coming back to your question, I would say, if we allowed ourselves to be present with and to presence, the parts of ourself that are feeling whatever it is, shame, guilt, deep grief, despair. That true acceptance, that radical acceptance, is an absolutely profound and pivotal part of what we need always, but especially now.
Beautiful. Thanks, Rupert. Manda, what do you have to share?
Yeah,
There's so many things.
I now have a whole page of notes, but I'll try and coalesce it down. I think with Rupert, I am very much now looking at everybody's internal civil war, because a lot of the fracturing of our world is projecting out the things that we don't accept in ourselves, that we react against the triggers. And a trigger for me is what happens when energy comes up against a frozen part of us. And that part is frozen either in our life history, or some of it is ancestral. I get very wary of pushing too much into ancestral history lines, because people will do a lot of work to heal their ancestral trauma in order not to have to look at what hurts inside. However, in the end, Rupert's right. When we get to that place of flow, everything flows through us. And two things. First is, I think we really need not just to embrace despair, but to embrace the absolute inevitability of our own death. Andrea Gibson died a few days before Joanna Macy, and the idea of the two of them walking west of the sunset together gives me great hope. And the conscious awareness that death is coming, and the capacity to give words to that and to make it a joy is outstanding. Thomas Hubel recently replayed or reposted an interview that he did with Andrea Gibson shortly before they died, and that joyful stepping into death is heartbreaking and heart-making at once. I definitely recommend everybody to listen to that, even if only for listening to Andrea reading out the poem that they read out at the end. It's stunningly good. And it ends up with the concept of love. And one of my very first teachers said there are basically two emotions. There's fear and there's love. And one of the things that I am moving with a lot is it's perfectly possible for me to be in terror and grief and still be in love with being alive. They are not mutually incompatible. And that falling in love with being alive allows my heart space to open and connect to the web of life. And then ask it, what do you need me to do? Because I think one of the things that has really got us to the edge of the cliff of potential species level extinction, and of the wiping out of other species for sure, is our insistence that our head minds have the answers and should have the answers and can have the answers. And not one of these is true. We are really good at linear thinking. We are really, really bad at understanding the complexity of hypercomplex systems. But our heart minds can engage with that absolutely. And then our head mind comes in service to life, to, I have connected to the web of life. I understand what's mine to do. My head mind is there to help me do that really well. It's not there to decide what is mine to do. And I think that's a fundamental shift, that if all 8 billion of us could make that shift, we would be in a different place by tomorrow. Rupert wants to say something.
Yeah, let me venture a couple of slight points of disagreement, because you never want on a podcast like this for the two guests to agree on absolutely everything. So two slight points of disagreement. You say, Manda, you think there's two emotions, fundamental emotion, love and fear. I think there's only actually one, love. I argue that fear too is a distorted form of love, and that all of the aversive emotions are rooted in love, and that is a profound reason for hope. And just on the kind of heart-mind point, I think it's a great point. But I would say if we have a broader vision of what the brain-mind or head-mind can be, along the lines, say, of Ian McGilchrist in his work, if we think of his sense of the contribution of the right hemisphere, then I think we can say that actually at the mental and brain level as well, there is room for what I think Manda is referring to when she talks about, rightly, about the importance of centering the heart. So we may not ultimately disagree about either of those things, but I thought I would try to offer them as slight amendments, perhaps friendly amendments to what you're saying.
I mean, it's interesting. Like, I recently started and have still yet to complete The Master and His Emissary, Ian McGilchrist. But what I found really fascinating was actually through shamanic practice, that long before I came across his work, I felt like I had these two primary places from which I engaged with the world. One is this kind of seems like this archetypal forest dwelling, sort of hermit like, musician artist out with the animals, like very sort of Snow White, but a bit more bruja, a bit more like, witchy. And then the other one was like this kind of almost like this kind of Boudica-esque. Actually, that does her a disservice to sort of reduce to the warrior, but this kind of like this warrior-like presence. And these parts would just literally be in absolute civil war, Manda, to borrow your term. And I realized this when I was writing the second book. And it got to the point where I was like, ladies, come on, we cannot tear myself asunder with this is just shit. This is just not fun. And I remember having this conversation with a few of my friends who are artists and who they're very up for these sorts of archetypal imaginings. And over time, these two have come to work together. And it's really interesting to see what happens when you bring the warrior into the forest and go, right, you've got some amazing skills. Let's put this into service to something different, deeper. And then they're like, oh, finally, I've got my mission and it works. And everyone's singing from the same kind of, it's like the orchestra has the conductor and the musicians and everyone's playing to the same tune. And the timpani guy at the back can play as loud as he likes because it's, not throwing anyone off. But there is something really beautiful about that and bringing these parts into coherence or concert or creative tension, which is also brilliant. I'm aware of the time. Like, there's so many things I'd love to ask you, but rather than ask you my questions, what are you burning to share with the time that we have left? What's left to be said that hasn't yet had the chance to be highlighted or voiced?
Rupert, go first. No, go on.
Oh, I was going to suggest you go first. I'll try saying a bit more about.
Go first.
I'll try saying a bit more about what we think the book has to offer in relation to this rich conversation we've been having. So one thing I would say is that what we really try to do in the book is to bring together, and it's a very short book, but to bring together in it a number of things that people don't always put together. So we brought together real gritty practitioners and theory and a sensibility towards imagination and the crucial role of fiction and what you might call the small p, a sort of political sensibility, a sense of kind of what social change looks like when it's effective. We tried to bring those things together and to suggest that it's actually really important to try to bring them together, to have a sort of bit of a systems view here, because one of the great hazards of our contemporary civilization, if that's what it is that it's terribly bad at that kind of systems view or overviewing. It's terribly good at siloing. This, again, is something that Ian McGilchrist is very good on criticizing, I think, in his work. And the aspect of the book that I would like to return to and really pull out a bit more is how important we felt it was to note that some of what is talked about in the book is already happening. Right. And this fits with the kind of broader sensibility of the Climate Majority Project, which the book sort of works towards as it proceeds. The venture that I'm now, a very ambitious venture that I'm now engaged in for the climate majority and the polycrisis majorities, we might say, to realize itself and the crucialness of that. That if what we were saying was, look, there's this really great idea of transformative adaptation, this connected idea of Thrutopia, and, you all should get busy trying to make these happen. That would be something, but it wouldn't kind of be very much, because a lot of people would be kind of like, well, that seems a bit daunting. And if we're so late in the day and it's not really happening yet, then what hope is there? So part of the way I think we generate that sense of active hope, at least I hope we do in the book, is by saying, look, this is already really happening in the sense that there are strands of the post-Extinction Rebellion landscape which are moving in this direction. There are organizations, community groups, etc., often unsung, who are doing this on the ground, and some of them are growing and flourishing and spreading, like the climate hubs and the climate emergency centers, for example. Just this weekend, I'm going to be going to check out a new climate emergency center, which is trying to form in Ipswich, in my region of East Anglia, in England, which is really, really exciting. And there is stuff happening also, as I mentioned earlier, crucially in the global south that we can learn from. There is inspiring stuff in the Indian subcontinent, in parts of the Middle East, in parts of Africa, where people are practicing elements of transformative adaptation, not usually by that name, but they are doing it. And one of the really crucial things we need to do is to be humble enough to be willing to learn from them, not to assume that the rich world, the developed world, etc., has all the answers, because it should be bloody obvious by now that we don't. And we need to let go of that hubris. We really, really do. We need to practice what is sometimes called reverse anthropology, where it's not about kind of going and studying the natives, but it's about going and seeing, okay, what can I actually learn from people who have fucked up the world a lot less than my people have. So that's the thing I would like to, if anything, single out from the book as kind of super relevant to our time and to giving us active hope. It is happening. It is starting to happen. What needs to happen is that it needs to be accelerated, it needs to be joined up, it needs to be resourced much better, of course. And to come back to where we started this conversation, we need to step into a much greater place of collective awareness in relation to this. And we need to realize that that is happening too. That the consciousness that other people are conscious of the trouble we're in and of some of the ways we can start to be in less trouble is spreading, it is growing. And that, in the darkness of this time, I think really is an encouraging thought.
Absolutely. And actually, if you're listening to this and you want to hear more about the examples, which I was going to ask you about, but we've run out of time talking about other amazing things, read the book, Transformative Adaptation. I'll ask for the links at the end. But
can we also just mention quickly
the
subtitle, Nathalie? Because I think that's also very important. Transformative Adaptation, Another World is Still Just Possible, which we think is a rather cute and sad and hopeful and relevant subtitle. I'm sure that listeners and viewers can see how that connects with our conversation that we've been having.
And the vitality of imagination coming together collectively now.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Manda, over to you.
I thought we'd run out of time. I agree with everything Rupert says. And I think I really do the inner work. I think it's so important that we all grow up. I think, this is Bill Plotkin. Our culture is locked in early adolescence, and not every member of it. We've spoken about Joanna Macy and Thich Nhat Hanh, and they were both clearly elders, and I would say Andrea Gibson. But most of our political leaders, most of the people who are setting the narrative agendas, I would say, somebody else said to me, screaming neon daddy issues. And they are deeply wounded, and we can hold compassion for that, but they do not need to be the people holding power. So finding ways to give power to people who are actually wise and becoming wise ourselves is crucial. And wisdom is about holding space for other people to do the necessary work, but we can only do that when we've done the work ourselves. So I think that's something that has emerged for me as my understanding of how important that is has emerged since this book was, certainly since it went to press and was published. So I think on top of everything that Rupert said, find the people local to you who get this. I went to a meeting in our local tiny little town last week, and it was about bringing together donut economics and regenerative thinking in the context of the natural landscape that used to be called an area of outstanding natural beauty, and this government thinks the most important thing it can do is rename that. So get involved with generative change in your area. Find the people who share the ideas that you do wherever you are in the world, because there will be ones. There will be other people who think like this. And then share the stories. I think we don't understand how much impact we have on the small conversations. The passing conversation with the person in the queue for the supermarket, or the second cousin that we hardly ever see. We, as writers, we are always taught that if we take a character 1,000 years back or 10,000 years back, they had better not tread on the wrong butterfly, because otherwise the whole of the future will change and they might not even be born. And then we're also told that we have no agency and nothing we can do will change the world. And these cannot both be true. Every breath we take makes a difference. Every word we say and the energy that comes behind it makes a difference. And abandon the concept that the world is going to be what we thought it was. Because the only thing we can say for certain is that is no longer true. And then every breath we take builds the world we want. So work out what that could feel like and make it happen. Now Rupert wants to answer you, so you're never going to get rid of us, Natalie.
I don't want to. I'd happily go for hours. Go on.
It's so beautiful, Manda. I just wanted to say a hopeful word about that often rightly castigated caste, the politicians. Even among politicians, awareness is starting to spread, mostly below the surface, of A, how much trouble we're in, and of B, the necessity for an adaptation and resilience-oriented response to it. So I've been hugely encouraged, for example, that Caroline Lucas, who frankly was not really in this space or this mindset a couple of years ago, is really totally in it now. And she's working closely with us now inside the Climate Majority Project, which is super exciting. Adrian Ramsey, Green Party MP, who I know very well, really cares about this and is working on it. It is hard for politicians to do this because, among other things, they've been taught... Broken. Yeah, they've been taught that they have to keep up a smiley face and be stubborn optimists no matter what, etc. When we ask politicians to actually go there into the gritty reality of where we are, and then of how much transformation is therefore needed to get us somewhere better, that is a hard thing for them to do. And we actually do need to support them in that. You know, we need to act as citizens and as creatives and whatever we are, right, to help to make politicians' jobs easier in this regard, to build the climate majority and to build the kind of imaginative sensibility that says, you know what, you don't have to go on playing the same game and muttering the same stale rhetoric forever. Something else is possible. Another world is still just possible. So, you know, we're in a very, very tough corner, and part of that is our mega fucked up political economy. But don't despair about that either, in the sense of, you know, don't give up on it definitively. If you feel despair, that's great, but work through it. And what you'll find when you work through it is there actually is the potentiality for engaging with politicians who are also trying to do that. I'll give you one more anecdote. I got to have a private meeting while I was working with Extinction Rebellion several years ago with the leader of one of Britain's absolutely main political parties. I'm not going to say which one. And we spoke to this person very frankly about the situation as we then saw it. Of course, the situation is even worse now. And we asked them to do something which politicians don't often do and are often asked to do. We said to this person, how does this make you feel? You know, what do you feel when you hear what we're telling you? And this person kind of looked a bit like a rabbit in the headlights for a moment. And then they replied to us, I feel terrified. And that to me was a hugely encouraging moment, you know, to know that although this person and their ilk would almost certainly, at least at the moment, not say that in public, but they're actually willing to feel it. You know, that's something which can be parlayed into something very different from what we have. And, you know, that very different from what we have thing is what we're trying to get at in this book.
So, best places for people to read the book, find your work. Now is the time that I ask you for the links that people can check out. Rupert, do you want to go first? Then I'll go to Manda.
Well, you can just Google Transformative Adaptation. Important to note for the US audience that it is literally just about to be published formally inside the US with Penguin Random House, which we're very excited about because hopefully that broadens our audience considerably. Obviously, what's necessary is for books, you know, like this and Manda's books and so on and so forth to reach a much wider audience. But also, if you want to know more, I think you're going to put stuff in the show notes, Nathalie, and, you know, do come to the Climate Majority Project, for example, for lots of cognate work on all this stuff.
Wonderful. Amanda? What resources do you want to
all
point
of the
people
above.
towards?
Whatever you do, don't buy it off the giant vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity. There are lots of other places you can buy books.
That's Amazon, for those of you
but
wondering.
Then when you have bought it, you do need to go and review it on the website of the giant vampire squid, because that makes a substantial difference to the algorithms, and other people will find it. So lots of reviews online. Please ask your local library. This needs to get to people whether they have the means to buy it or not. Yes. So if you have the means, buy 2 or 3 copies and hand them out to people where you think it'll land. Don't use it to trigger the crazy uncle who pisses you off a lot at the Thanksgiving dinner. But hand it out. If you think it's worth it, then, you know, Give it to the people where it will land who might otherwise not see it. Word of mouth is always the best way to sell a book. And Climate Majority Project, you can find me on accidentalgods.life. If you're interested in particular in the Thrutopic narratives, it's Thrutopia's THRU, topia.life. And thank you. Keep listening to Nathalie's podcast because it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you both. What a treat to be in conversation with you, and all the power to this book and to your work.
Thank you. You too.